Hi guys, this is COMM122 and for today we are going to talk about the nature of radio, right? So first let's define radio as a communication medium. Radio is a medium for hearing. Messages are carried through voices, sound, music, noise, and silence. Now radio is mass medium. It has wider reach. A single radio broadcast can be received by millions of people. And basically, radio is what we call uh, mass audience medium, meaning uh, there are a lot of audiences or there are a lot of people that can actually avail of or afford radio. So in turn, they have access to this kind of communication medium. So then what are the advantages of radio? So first, radio stimulates imagination. The lack of images can actually become a positive because it can stimulate the imagination of the listeners. Radio appeals to disadvantaged groups again because radio is cheap and everybody can avail of a radio receiver. Radio overcomes geographical and physical barriers because even though um, radio is done electronically, but you can only have or it only takes uh, a few watts to broadcast radio signals. And also radio utilizes signals, so it doesn't have to be wired, it can be wireless in terms of information dissemination. Radio messages are tailored to the listeners, meaning when writing for radio or radio information is intended for listeners, not for viewers, not for readers, but intended for the information to be received via your ears or your auditory senses. Okay? Radio has music and radio is an entertainment medium. Okay, so that is the advantages of radio. Now, of course, we have limitations of radio also. Now, radio lacks personal contact like any other mass media. So, radio is designed to reach as many audiences as possible. So, meaning, somewhat it loses personal contact. Radio lacks permanence. When you hear radio or when you hear the message in radio, so you cannot go back to the message. Unlike, for example, if you're going to compare it to newspapers, where if you cannot understand, then you can always read the newspaper or read the article again. For radio, once the DJ or the announcer has said the information, then it can no longer be rewound. Or in our case, uh, because of technology, we can now do that, but it has to happen as a recorded message, not as a live message. Okay? Radio has difficulty putting messages into context. It has difficulty, but it is not impossible. For example, when you hear the voices of people on the radio, you cannot really tell who the voice is unless that person introduces himself or herself. Okay? Radio does not hold the listener's full attention, meaning radio is what we call a background medium. Okay, you listen to radio while doing something else, like you listen to radio while driving, you listen to radio while washing your clothes or doing your homework, etc. So in a way, uh, we do not really focus on the medium or the information on radio unless it is important to us. And of course, like any other broadcast medium, radio can also suffer from interference from the weather, for of course, power interference. So those are the limitations of radio. Okay? Now, types of radio stations. Now, radio is categorized not so much of by what it does, but as how it is financed. The main types of organizational funding for radio is as follows. Okay? Commercial station, financed by national and local sport advertising or sponsorship, and run by a public company with shareholders. So you have private ownership, funded by personal income of all kinds. Example, commercial advertising, subscriptions, donations. So commercial stations and private ownerships are basically very, very similar. So um, they use advertisements, they use sponsorships, donations, subscriptions to fund the radio broadcast. Okay, others like public service funded by the government, public service subscription station, and public service funded by a license fee are all done not to um, uh, earn or not to advertise, but basically to serve or to disseminate information to the public. So, but again, the operational costs can be covered by the government, by subscription, or by a license fee. Okay. Others, you have institutional ownership. For example, university campus, hospitals, or factories run their own radio stations, and they are paid for example, for university radio stations, they are paid for by the students. So the students are the ones who are the primary audience of that station. Okay, then you have government station paid for from taxation, and government owned station funded largely by commercial advertising. Okay, so these are two types. These are two kinds of radio run organization. One basically is funded wholly by the government. The next one, the government owned station funded largely by commercial advertising, is done as if the government runs a privately owned business. Okay. Radio organizations run for specific religions, just like for schools or institutions, we have radio stations run for specific religions. Mostly, if you go through the AM stations, you can go to, let's say, Radio Veritas for Catholics. Then you have other stations that are run for different or I'm sorry, are run by different religious organizations also. Okay, now primarily for development communication, there are community ownership. Okay, this happens in far flung or in the uh, far places in the Philippines where um, they put small radio stations to cater to the area where people are located. Usually, this happens in agricultural um, provinces. Okay? And then you have restricted service license, or on a low power and having a limited lifespan to meet a particular need. Example, 1 month license for a city to cover a festival. So restricted license meaning it has limitations in terms of power and in terms of the dates, or how long will the radio station operate. This is done primarily for logistic purposes of festivals, of community fiestas, etc. Okay. Now, radio, of course, does not exist in a vacuum. It has outside pressures. It's said that no radio station and therefore no producer exists in a vacuum. It has context connections, each one useful and necessary, but also representing a source of potential pressure. Okay? So, meaning, there are a lot of outside factors that can actually interfere with the information, the news, and the content in general that is broadcasted by a radio station. You have the government, of course, with its regulations. You have community interests, of course. You have the advertisers. Okay? You have the owners, of course. You have the advisory bodies of the owners. Of course, you have the listener and the community that that listener belongs to. So those are the things that can actually um, affect the contents of a radio station, may it be for entertainment or for news and current affairs. Okay? So that ends our lecture on the elements of radio. Please uh, uh, keep in mind that your other lectures will be posted in this particular module. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and I'll see you in the next lecture.